All right, so we are going to get started. So once again, welcome and thank you so much for joining us on this 2022 workshop style webinar, Supporting Art and Technology, Building Futures We Need. I'm Sherilyn Seeley, the Senior Program Manager here at GIA, and I'm wearing a green dress with some dangly pearl kind of earrings here. And before we start our 90-minute workshop, just take a moment to review the Zoom feature so you can have an optimal experience with us today. We can go to the next slide. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, please do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat box by clicking the chat symbol in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and just make sure you're sending a message to everyone. And then when we get to the discussion section of the presentation, you can feel free to use the raise a hand feature to unmute, and we'll also be using the chat as well. And lastly, if you'd like your experience to include live captioning, you can select closed caption. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen in your toolbar, you should see the option there for captioning. You'll see live transcript CC, and you can click that. Show subtitles. And yeah, so that's great. Now, for the content of our presentation, some of you might remember at the 2020 conference, Grantmakers in the Arts opened a discussion about arts and technology with Ruha Benjamin, Salomia Sega, and Sage Crump. And in that keynote conversation, the speakers reaffirmed that the digital world is not neutral, but it's a space that's intentionally shaped and impacts our worldview on things. And so, that's always been the case. But since the pandemic, technology has played an even more significant role in the way that we view and interact with the world around us. And of course, artists have continued to show their leadership of culture shaping and have been using it more and more as a strategy for narrative change and narrative shift. And so today we're glad to explore how funders can partner with artists to shape the present and future we live in as they leverage the impact of the digital world. And so joining us today, we have Jax Deluca, Media Arts Director from the National Endowment for the Arts, LaJuné McMillian, multidisciplinary artist and educator, and Eleanor Savage, Program Director at Jerome Foundation. And I will drop a link in the chat here so you can check out their bios. There you go. All right, and there will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so you can hold on to your questions until then. So for starters, we want to kick off our presentation today with a poll just to get a sense of who's in the room. So we can go on to the next slide. So just take a minute to let us know your current level of support for arts and technology projects. So you'll see a poll pop up on your screen. Should pop up. There we go. Here it is. All right. So just let us know, is this kind of a part of your work and you're extremely familiar with it? You've got an entire portfolio. Maybe you're joining us today and you're actually not a funder. Maybe you're not really sure, or you categorize some of your grants or projects a little bit differently, where it might be arts and technology, but you've never really called it that. So just let us know. Take a minute to select the option that fits best with you, and we'll see kind of where we land and see what we're working with here today. All right, so we've got our results in, which is great. So it looks like most of us here don't have it as a primary funding focus area, but do fund arts and tech projects. So that's great. And it looks like, there is kind of a mix of us here. So this will be a really good conversation. And because we've got an intimate group here today, we might even have an opportunity to get into a discussion with each other where we unmute and just kind of chat together. So thank you all for taking the poll. And now I'm going to kick it over to our experts here and have LaJuné get us started.
Thanks so much. Yes, this is LaJuné. I'm a new media artist, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Black Movement Library. And so, oh, I guess that slide isn't there. Okay, but I just did have a few slides of just like previous work. But essentially, in the past few years, access to a lot of these various tools like motion capture data and 3D character-based models and software to make animation yourself has skyrocketed. From MakeHuman, the Mixamo, to Carnegie Mellon's motion capture database, the ability to make and finish polished projects has become easier for many. And while these resources are extremely helpful to create a range of projects, they lack tools to create diverse characters and movements unexplored by systems that center assumptions of neutrality. So essentially, I basically have been working within motion capture and performance and technology now for about 7 years. But I found that there are a lot of issues around access to these various different tools. And so I began to really research and think about ways to open access to various different tools and softwares, and basically for myself and also for my community. And so I got my first residency at IBeam in 2018. And I began to work on the Black Movement Library there. And during that time, when I first started, I realized that I wasn't necessarily looking at the problem as a sort of multi-layered issue. So I needed to basically think about all of the various different ways that movement has been exploited, but also appropriated, not only through various different points in culture, but also in the sort of media tools that we use today. So this was just like one of the examples that I guess really expanded my research to sort of wider fields. But in 2018, lawsuits were filed against Fortnite for using dances mainly from Black creators without permission, compensation, or credit. And so the Millie Rock became the Swipe It and the Carlton became the Fresh, effectively erasing the origins of these dances. However, the lawsuits are still on pause because the dances are not considered choreography under copyright law. And then there are other examples of this sort of thing happening with like digital blackface and sort of the sort of internet culture and social media culture on Twitter and also in TikTok, which would be like two other examples of this. But on the flip side, when you are looking for these dances and movements in existing motion capture databases, you may find some movements, but often you're met with dances and movements that don't reflect the search terms. And also, in the name of making it easy to use, these tools often omit valuable information from the users, including information about the motion capture actor who provided the movements, as well as important historical and cultural information about the movements performed. So this GIF in the back is actually from a tool from Adobe called Mixamo, which is a great tool for folks who are interested in getting into motion capture. However, they don't necessarily, like basically on the left side, you sort of see all these dances and basically you just don't know like where those movements are coming from. And so I found that to be really problematic, especially for me who is like creating projects that are mainly about race and gender and culture. And so this is an example of one of the character creation softwares that I use called FaceGen. And it's a plugin for DAZ 3D. And it's really great for uploading pictures of yourself and recreating an avatar for you. And so I use this tool to basically create a range of different avatars. However, on the right side, you can see all of the various different problematic sliders, particularly at the bottom where African, East Asian, South Asian, and European are all basically relegated to like just a slider, which is extremely problematic because there are a range of different ways that people look in all of these various regions. And also it sort of shows how the sort of software engineers are thinking about bodies and thinking about how people look within various different areas. And also what I find interesting about this tool too is how those sliders are also connected to what the software engineers think about gender. So whenever the character becomes darker in skin tone, the slider from male to female sort of becomes more male, whereas when the character becomes lighter in skin tone, it becomes more female, which is also very problematic, but something that we see a lot in society, a lot of the times in society today. And so like basically saying that these tools are often reflecting the sort of culture and society that we already live in. And so I've been just thinking about like, how do we combat this erasure, dilution, and exploitation of Black culture and Black people? And also thinking about how we can maybe discover, learn, invest in, and steward systems and technologies that prioritize our liberation and abundance. And so, oops, my other slide. And so basically, the Black Movement Library expanded from, it started as an online database of Black motion capture data and Black character-based models. But as I was saying before, it didn't necessarily include all of the various different issues that I wanted to really talk about in research and do workshops for. And so it is also a basically an archive of Black movement, as well as a, I guess like a sort of like cultural hub for like movement, and also for doing performances, creating workshops, a way to have conversations with one another. And yeah, so one of the projects, sorry, I think I'm trying to click to the next slide. But, oops, sorry. Okay, cool. So one of the ways that I do this through the Black Movement Library is with movement portraits. And movement portraits serve as a way to learn about the lives of the performers, contributing their movement data to the Black Movement Library. And it's asking this question about what happens when we ritualize this archival process of data collection and invite the community in as a witness. And so essentially I work with performers, and I use motion capture and Unreal Engine to take their movement data and to create these live visual experiences. And over the course of development, I do interviews with each performer, learning their movement histories. Those interviews that I do with them are then embedded into the soundscapes that the performers move to, allowing the audience to dive into their lives and learn how Black movement has been used as a tool of preservation of Black culture, as well as a vehicle of self-evolution. And so I've been really interested in ways to not only just like archive the sort of movements just as the data itself, but also to remember that I'm also archiving these stories of the folks that I'm working with, which is extremely important to me. And so, and while these portraits are real-time motion capture performances, they're also translated and archived as VR and single channel video experiences. And this allows those movements to be re-represented as an abstract visual memory of the performance day. And yeah, and basically last June, I got to premiere movement portraits as a live outdoor projection map experience, featuring 5 Black New York City-based performing artists, as well as movement portraits developed as part of a workshop from workshop participants as well. And this was featured with a blade of grass. And yeah, it was projected on the Brooklyn Public Library for 2 nights. And it was like an hour-and-a-half long experience, which basically morphed these sort of like real documentaries, and that also transitioned into abstract documentaries. And so I'm just going to share a video now. The first video is of just like a snippet of that night. And then the second video is basically an idea of what an actual movement portrait looks like after I go back and recreate the animation as the single channel video. So, yeah.
culture is not only about me, like it's literally driven by community.
And I think spirit, I think energy.
It's so embedded in everything that we do. So you're waiting for like an hour and a half for just 3 minutes of They were.
It's important to educate and disinfluence them to. There's evolution.
So each portrait is around 10 minutes long, the sort of animated, and also the performance as well. And yeah, as I was saying, they're captured live, and then I also rework with them and create animations and VR experiences from there. And so yeah, so now I'm still working on this project, and now they're taking on a new life as 5 vertical video portraits featuring the documentaries, both real and abstract. And each mover is also paired with an immersive virtual reality experience for people with headsets to download or experience in person. And this is sort of what this is just like what I'm like dreaming up for it to look like, and and it will premiere this June. And this is just like a snippet of like what the VR experience will look like. And yeah, I just also like the major ways that fellowships, residencies, and grants have helped my practice is through funding and through like just getting access to the technologies and the tools that I actually wouldn't have access to. I was able to actually like buy motion capture suits, which are extremely expensive. So like they are like around like $3,000, and these are actually just like movable motion capture. It's not a full motion capture system, but now I have like 4, which is like super amazing. But also through like administrative help, access to mentorship, and then also the connection to the wide community of artists and technologists who are also thinking in this way, and space and time to dream. And so I wanted to just leave with just like 2 different quotes about Black movement. And Black movement does not only represent our individual experience, but it also represents our collective memory, transcending space, time, and oppressive social structures. It allows us to connect to each other, our ancestors, our deepest selves, and gives us space to communicate to our future. Black movement is a technology holding the stories of our existence across the diaspora. And it's time for our bodies and movements to be seen and realized as more than just data points and avatars, because they hold our humanity. And it's time for all digital spaces and for all physical spaces that we enter to reflect that. And that's it for me. Thank you. And I'll pass it to Eleanor.
Amazing. Thank you, LaJuné. I'm Eleanor Savage, Program Director at the Jerome Foundation. And just to give you some context about Jerome Foundation, we're an independent foundation. We're founded in 1964. We make grants to early career artists and to nonprofit arts organizations that serve them. And we fund across many artistic fields. And we have a geographic focus in New York's, the 5 boroughs of New York City and Minnesota. And the foundation has supported technology-centered arts since the late 1980s. This funding direction was guided by the foundation's commitment to and values of innovation and creative risk-taking. We seek to solve to support unconventional approaches to solving problems and artists who are expanding, questioning, experimenting with, or reimagining artistic forms, which is exactly what artists like LaJuné, who's a 2021 Jerome Hill Artist Fellow, are doing in this sphere. Okay, now I have to figure out how to change slides and get my notes. I can chew gum and walk at the same time. And so Sherilyn mentioned this Building the Future We Want keynote, and I don't know how many of you attended it, part of the Grantmakers in the Arts 2020 virtual convening. But as someone working for a foundation that supports art and technology, I found this so inspiring and mind expanding because Sage Crump, Ruha Benjamin, and Salome Asega highlighted this incredible work that tech-centered artists are doing to not only create incredible art, but to intervene in the way technology is designed and used, as you know, LaJuné has demonstrated through their practice. So this is such a dynamic spectrum of work and projects that are focused on building values-based tools, systems and practices rooted in justice, projects that are addressing race, equity, accessibility, consent, making data visible and meaningful, and providing resilient solutions. And I know I would be voted the least likely person to be a cheerleader, but that is what I am here today to do. And I want to build on the great work that has already been talked about and encourage you all in the support of this work. So I'm going to share a little bit about Jerome's journey. In the sphere of art and technology, we began supporting HarvestWorks Digital Media Arts in 1984. And in 1989, we began supporting Helen Thorington's New Radio and Performance, which in 1996, she started a commissioning program for what was at that time called net, web, or hybrid art. And in 2001, we began funding Rhizome, I-Beam in 2003, and Northern Lights MN in 2008. And when we started funding the sector, there was so much confusion about how to categorize it. Do we put it in media? Is it visual arts? We put it in media. And what do we call it? Is it net art? Is it new media? Now tech-centered art? The reality is that just as technology in general is rapidly moving and changing, so too are the artists working and developing technology. And how exciting to support work that is moving and changing so rapidly that we can't keep up. At Jerome, our value around humility asks us to be in service to artists and to arts organization leaders. And our goal is to be in an ongoing feedback loop, to be responsive to how artists are working. We ask ourselves, what is the best way to serve artists in this field? And we make mistakes. And on a best day, we learn and grow from those mistakes. But our starting point with artists is to begin with relationship building, and through those relationships to understand how to adapt our programs, guidelines, and application requirements to serve artists. So let me share a little bit more about a few of the artists and organizations that we support. Through Jerome's funding to I-Beam, the Rapid Response for a Better Digital Future Fellowship, we were introduced to the work of Valencia James and her artistic research on the application of machine learning in dance, how artificial intelligence might be used to change the future of performing arts. The image on screen is from a collaborative project Valencia developed called Volumetric Performance Toolbox. This was created in response to the effect of COVID-19 on performers' ability to connect with live audiences. This virtual platform offers artists an accessible, user-friendly technology to create and perform from their own living spaces, and offers audiences a communal experience using minimal equipment. Oops, too fast. Through the Laundromat Project, our funding to the Laundromat Project, we were introduced to Aria Malenciano, a recipient of a 2019 Create Change Fellowship. Aria is an artist, designer, and creative technologist, and also the founder of Afrotectopia, a space cultivating Black radical imagination through the intersection of art and technology, and through a host of programs, including festivals of new work, think tanks, fellowships, learning opportunities for adults and youth, and more. This tech-centered space is rooted in collaborative research practices fostering Black agency and empowerment. And both Valencia and Aria were supported through Jerome funding 2 organizations, but we also fund artists directly through the Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship and through our film, video, and digital production program. And artists working with technology are approaching this work through many, many different artistic fields. So on this slide, Kathy McTavish, she was a 2019 Jerome Hill Artist Fellow. She's based in Duluth, Minnesota. It's a town in northern Minnesota. Kathy is a media composer, a cellist, and an installation artist whose work blends data, text, code, sound, and abstract layered moving images and textiles. And they're working to humanize and queer artificial intelligence and on ways to translate from digital into the physical. So this slide shows work from Kathy's generative textile drawings. The large background image you see is a close-up of a quilt, one of the quilts that you'll see hanging in the installation view in the bottom left corner. Kathy uses a robotic quilting machine programmed by computer to create data maps across fabric surfaces with hand-stitched counterpoint. Jay Afrasando is a 2021 Jerome Hill Artist Fellow. He's a multimedia artist, a music composer, and an educator. And his work invites us to examine our notions of bodily diversity. He uses sound, video, and other media to explore the experiences of hearing and listening, disability and accessibility, and the politics of technology and science. The image at the bottom left shows Afrasando's recent project, Oral Architecture, developed with a signer and a vocalist to present oral experiences challenging misconceptions around deafness and sound. He wants to bridge the seemingly contrasting poles between deaf and hearing cultures and abolish autism. And here, Shalini Kantaya was supported through our film, video, and digital production program for her documentary film, Coded Bias, which follows researchers and advocates, principally Joy Wolamwini, an MIT computer scientist, artist, and activist, and founder of the Algorithmic Justice League. Wolamwini and others explore how algorithms encode and propagate racial and gender bias and expose the threat that these automated systems pose to civil and human rights. And if you go to the Coded Bias website, you'll find an invitation there to sign in support of the Universal Declaration of Data Rights as human rights. Okay, and then last but not least, here's an artist who is not a Jerome grantee, but I really wanted to highlight her. She's part of the featured NEA report, Amelia Winger Bearskin. She is from the Seneca Cayuga Nation of Oklahoma, Deer Clan, and part of the Haudenosaunee Confederation. On screen here, you'll see Collective Wisdom, which is one of her current projects. It's a first of its kind field study on the media industry, on co-creation, and a step toward articulating contemporary co-creative practices and ethics. So I want to share a clip here from Amelia because she really essentializes some of the beautiful brilliance of this work.
We use stories as a way of taking values and ethics and putting them into the core of innovation. I started looking at the media landscape we have now. How do I take information and encode it for future generations? A lot of my work is really about creating an ethical framework for software development and design and articulation of values and ethics within technologies with the understanding that we need to future-proof these. There's a notion that the technology we've created now has outrun us. No one knows how to regulate it. We accidentally opened this Pandora's box and we can't get it all back inside. But actually, we can choose to use technology to build a more just world, a more equitable world. We can demand that. We can say that we want algorithms that are human-centered, that are for our environment, that are pro-democracy. We can articulate the values we want to see in technology and communicate those to 7 generations in the future. What do we want to achieve with the culture and social network that we're creating?
So both the NEA Field Scan and this talk today offer windows into this sphere of work and introductions to artists with radical visions for the present and the future. Please consider getting to know these artists in this work. If you're not already supporting tech-centered artists and you want help connecting, let me know. Or if you want to hear what not to do when setting up work sample requirements for applications, I am here for you. I wholeheartedly encourage you to support these artists through relationship, partnership, funding, and advocacy. Thank you. And I will hand off now to the incredible Jax Deluca.
Thanks, Eleanor. Right back at you. And LaJuné, great presentations. I like that you said, how exciting is it that the field is constantly changing and the artwork is always evolving in new ways. And that is exactly what is captured in this report. And for funders, I really knew that there was a challenge to continually relearn or learn what's going on in the field because it is expanding in so many different ways and directions that it's impossible to categorize. So since we knew that there were funder challenges in navigating the field, this report is essentially the result of a 2-year field scan we were doing, looking at the different artistic practices and looking at the values and the contributions and the types of artwork that they're making. So that way, as a funder, you might want to rethink how you might ask for those work samples or how do your guidelines actually accept and embrace and welcome this type of work because there's so many different pathways into this field. Somebody might have come up through it through computer science, or maybe somebody who was a theater practitioner maybe moved into this field, or someone from dance. So there's so many different trajectories that there really isn't a repository that shows artists how to apply for funding also. So I think there's just a lot of that type of infrastructure that we're really passionate about helping others navigate as well. So the first part of this report is all about exploring the work, including understanding the artistic motives and also even understanding ways that the field is engaging in social practice work. And then there's a second section of the report, which is then designed to help funders navigate the existing creative ecosystem, which is very complex. And also we talk a little bit about existing regional hubs and centers of activities, and that's both for in-person audiences and also for online communities. There's a very rich and robust ecosystem online that's often invisible to funders. So a lot of that's in the report. So we really, even if you are already currently supporting the field in various ways, this report can kind of help you rethink and look at and maybe fine-tune some strategies. In addition to that report, we have 10 commissioned essays, and in that, Eleanor did a fantastic essay, which I'm sure will be provided to you after this session. And there's also 9 artist case studies and video profiles, and that video with Amelia is one of those video profiles. In addition, we've recently just released a 2-page guide for public art funders, so that could also be helpful. While you've seen a few examples of work already, and LaJuné talked about her practice, I just wanted to provide a few additional examples to just show how this work is creating accessible entry points for others, and also is intersecting with either environmental justice issues and could even promote health reform and related issues that might be systemic to our healthcare system. So on the left is Erin Davey, and she was a processing fellow, and she focused her whole fellowship around this project called Cozy Coding. And really those are live interactive tutorials she's doing in open source code toolkits for artists. And that's creating accessible entry points. And her reasoning for wanting to do this is because she said had she not had the education at Carnegie Mellon University, she probably would not know that these open source toolkits existed. Or so how are other people finding this in areas that might have a barrier to go to that type of a school? So Cozy Coding, Erin Davey is an example of how an artist is creating accessible entry points for others through their arts projects. That middle one is Design.io, and this is an image of Connected Worlds, which is an immersive video installation that was seen at the New York Hall of Science. And so in this installation, and you see two kids interacting with it, visitors could plant seeds or divert water or engage with multiple habitats that were all connected in various immersive environments. And they could do that by using their hands or their feet. And through this, as the objects or things were interacted with, they created chain reactions in relationship to the other connected worlds. So through this, visitors and even kids could start understanding what systems thinking approaches would be, and to better understand how local actions in one place could have global consequences across all of the connected worlds. So that's just some interesting things of how this type of work can help illustrate these larger concepts. And last, on the right-hand side is an image of iWriter. And that man that you see in the picture is a graffiti artist who was diagnosed with ALS, which had left him almost completely paralyzed, except for his eyes. And an international community of software developers and hardware hackers and urban projectionists came together to develop a low-cost, open-source eye tracking system, which actually allowed people to draw with their eyes. So after this was developed, the instructions were released for free and open source and allowed anybody to make a DIY iWriter. And so if you go to their website, you'll see all the various spin-off projects, but on a more practical side, it did make an otherwise unaffordable technology affordable to those who might need it. So those are just different ways that artists are really making these great interventions that are relevant. And so there are some themes in our Tech as Art report that I just wanted to uplift. So the report is really talking about how artists are creating works with digital technology, either by writing code, visualizing data, or developing interactive experiences. It's also looking at the ways artists are building community by developing shared open source tools and establishing online forums for knowledge exchange. And they're also founding organizations to facilitate the creativity of others. And Eleanor brought up an example of that with Afrotectopia. The themes in the report also uplift ways that artists are critiquing the influence of technologies on daily life through projects that are questioning pervasive practices like data collection, AI, surveillance, and their disproportionate impact on communities of color. And it's also bringing an arts and humanities lens to technology. So this slide has some opportunities that might actually provide some starting points for funders to consider how these practices might fit within your own funding priorities. So we have three categories of improving the capacity of the arts field to address tech challenges. So that's more infrastructure based. Other opportunities would be bringing in artists and practitioners to advance gender, racial, and economic equity across the arts and other industry sectors, and also supporting projects that are engaging local communities and addressing social issues, and also bridging digital divides through their arts projects. And what we learned in so many conversations with artists is while many of them are doing this work, a lot of them might not really identify the critical role they could play in building digital literacy and participating and dovetailing with some of the digital inclusion initiatives that might be run by a city. So this activity is happening, but I think we could also help bolster support for this type of framework. And just kind of a high level view of artist challenges, which may not come as a surprise because all arts disciplines are facing infrastructure challenges, but I really do feel confident in saying that these issues are magnified for artists who are engaging with this type of practice. So again, it's kind of across the board, just accessing the technology, access to artistic and professional development programs that are really suited to the different levels of expertise and needs. And then again, access to creation and exhibition opportunities in venues that actually allow the work to be installed as envisioned. Conversely, we also have challenges that arts organizations are facing. And again, this might also not come as a surprise. But here we're really looking at the infrastructure that's needed to develop organizational capacity to serve the needs of artists. So regardless if you fund artists or organizations directly, there are really plenty of opportunities for this work to align with your portfolio. And some additional resources that we're about to put out is a regional trends report that was built from conversations across 7 different roundtables in Detroit, St. Paul, New York, Pittsburgh, San Jose, Santa Fe, and Miami. And from there, we worked with participants to do some Jamboarding and do a light mapping of cultural assets. And then we worked with participants to brainstorm ways to build upon those existing assets to strengthen infrastructure. So that's different ideas around hosting various types of convenings or knowledge building activities to share resources. So this report now is it's about 40 to 50 pages right now, and it's summarizing all of the different discussions, but we're also including the Jamboards. And in there, there's so much exciting information and names of people. So if you're a funder looking for practitioners in your area, these might be stems for you to start from. And so I wanted to just go over a few best practices as a funder's perspective. So one thing that we're encouraging people to ask themselves is how your grant programs are supporting arts and tech initiatives. So are you explicitly referencing creative code or emerging forms at that intersection of arts and technology in your grant guidelines or your eligible activities or your funding priorities? It might also mean developing a specific funding program based on the needs of the area that you're supporting. It could also mean just looking at just providing support for the development and the maintenance and the educational activities related to the open source toolkits for the arts. I know in that field alone, there's so many people doing free labor, and there's a report on that as well. But that whole ecosystem could use its own vein of support to keep it running. So I think those are 3 best practices that are named here, but in that 2-page guide, there's a lot more, and that's on our website and will be sent to you. And my last slide is in our roles, just thinking a little bit about how we're cultivating regional arts infrastructure and cross-sector networks. So best practice number 1 is nurturing those relationships across cultural organizations of all sizes and types. And the New York State Council on the Arts has been doing this. I know Karen Helmerson and Arian are on the line, but I recently got to sit in on one, and it's an arts and tech meetup, and it's all of these different organizations at very different levels of and ways of coming into the field, but just hearing them talk about their needs based on the communities they're working in was really great. And I think that that's one way that funders could play a role in nurturing those cross-sector relationships. And second, really thinking about what type of targeted initiatives could be developed through the mapping of regional assets. So the regional report would be a start, but also the Knight Foundation has some really great models on doing this, and they have some expertise building on the Night Cities and their digital arts transformational initiatives. And there's actually a lot of knowledge on there from things that they've learned as well as funders. So that's another thing. And then third, building connectivity between often siloed grant portfolios or departments. So an example of this would be Ford Foundation's Tech Fellows program. And that's actually a program that Salome went through where she was a tech fellow, bringing together that creativity, freedom and expression portfolio with Margaret Morton and working with the technology portfolio and bringing together those two departments within Ford Foundation. And there's some writings and things about that and interviews with Salome about that. But those are some really unique ways that you could think about how your funding practice could be transformed to support this field. So those are some things that you can do now. And that is the end of my presentation, so we can get to the workshopping.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Jax, Eleanor, and LaJuné. That was great. And there will be, I know at the beginning of your presentation, LaJuné, there was some work that you were planning on sharing. And because of tech, this is one of the reasons, one of the downsides of tech, but because of tech, something wasn't happening for it to come through, but we'll make sure that we're able to see it a little bit later and you'll get to speak to it. But at this point, you know, you've heard a lot from our presenters about why to support arts and tech, what arts and tech projects can look like and the power that lies within those. So we're opening it up to you right now to get a sense of, you know, what's on your mind right now, what's standing out to you, and also let us know what questions are kind of cycling through your mind as we go into the Q&A. We want to address some of those things and now in discussion with our presenters, and we also will be continuing on with this theme of arts and technology after today. So go ahead and share your thoughts in the chat, or, you know, we've got an intimate enough group where if you are feeling it in your belly and you want to unmute and speak out, you can feel free to do that as well. But we'd love to hear what's standing out to you and what you're still wondering about before we go into our Q&A.
Looks like Maureen has her hand up.
I do.
Yes,
That's
thank
okay.
you.
Thanks. Thanks very much to all of you for your presentations. I really appreciate the update of what the opportunities are and the current status of things with regard to arts and technology. For our foundation, which has a pretty narrow mandate in terms of disciplines, we do fund arts and technology projects, although we don't have a specific line of work. But I'm really not finding as much activity in terms of artists in contemporary dance, jazz, and theater really using digital technology to create work. Their main focus, as far as I can tell, seems to be more around dissemination and presentation of work. And I'm wondering what you're seeing. For example, in your Tech is Art report, you know, when I look at dance in particular, I think I saw that you interviewed about 66 individual artists. Only 4 of them could be generously classified as dance makers, I think. And of course, I acknowledge the hybridity of the moment that we're living in, where discipline classifications mean less and less on a daily basis. But I am still curious what you see for artists whose roots are in those 3 disciplines.
Who wants to go first on that?
I'm happy.
Oh, go ahead.
Happy to respond. So we're seeing at Jerome, we're seeing artists from so many different fields that are working at that intersection of art and technology. So Valencia James is an example that I shared, who's working with AI in the field of dance. And that, you know, volumetric performance toolbox was, you know, an initiative to respond to kind of the moment when we couldn't go to dance spaces to see the work. And we needed the work to come into our living room, so to speak, for dancers and audiences. Both Kathy McTavish and Jay Afrasando are composers, and they are, working in very different ways. I think that for Kathy, her early work with technology and code led her to want to physicalize the code in a way, which moved it into an installation experience. But the composition of that is still very present. And Jay is, in addition to kind of the project, one of the projects that I talked about that is addressing access, he's globally interested in how to think about, instead of disability, to think about access and biological diversity, and how to bring the experience of that into the way that you're actually experiencing the work. So those are a few examples, but this hybridity is something that we are experiencing across all forms. And then in performance, especially in theater, we've supported at least 2 explicitly art and technology projects of artists that are working in theater.
I'll just build on that as well. I think outreach is really helpful. And Eleanor had mentioned this relationship building with the communities that are kind of working at that center of technology. There might be many spokes that are coming out, but sometimes people don't identify solely within one discipline. And so I think it's a little bit harder, and some of these artists are more elusive to find. But some maybe starting points to think about. NYU has a dance and technology track. And that's looking at the ways that there's interactivity in dance and code in dance. The National Theater, not in the United States, but there is a digital lab for theater practitioners working with digital tech in new ways. So they're doing these hybrid VR performances and different things, but we're a little bit behind in the United States, I think, in terms of having these types of incubation centers and labs being supported and funded at the level. And what we found is a lot of universities are doing it. But then after that, there's a drop off for artists who are maybe doing that type of work because they don't have the venue or they don't have the right type of support. So what you're asking is a really good question, because I know that there's artists that do exist in there. So there could be some intersections. We support also something called the Musical Theater Factories Mixed Reality Lab. And so that's more of an incubator space. And LaJuné, do you want to talk a little bit about some artists who might be working in this space, or how common or uncommon do you think it is from your artist perspective?
Yeah, so I think for me, I was going to say definitely through the workshops. Like for I think that workshops are very important too, for movers who are interested in, I guess, like transitioning into this space. I know that Valencia, part of her piece and her work is she had like a series of workshops that introduced dancers to the technology. And I actually got to like teach one, which was really cool. So I think, and also with my practice, I collaborate with a lot of different performers and dancers in various different levels. So I think that really just having access to just be in the space with the technology and to learn more about the technologies is really important. Having access to play with the tools, as well as really like workshop with the tools too. Because I think that for many performers, at least for the ones that I work with, like I was saying before, like, the motion capture suits and studios, those are very much tied to, oftentimes, to universities. Like I went to NYU's integrated digital media program, so that's how I was introduced to a lot of these various different tools. And so having access to motion capture, having access to virtual reality headsets, and to the actual technology that's needed, and then beyond that, to learn those tools, it takes time. And it's really, I guess, like also like a bridge between like technologists and artists with performers too. So yeah, like my previous project, I was working with a choreographer, and we were working from two various different spaces and bringing like what we learned together. So just finding those, and we were actually introduced by Abrams Art Center. So I didn't know her beforehand, but we were introduced by the organization. So I think that like those introductions are really important as well.
Can I say one more
Thank you
thing?
for that. Yeah, go ahead.
One of the things I think is key for Jerome Foundation, the 2023 Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship is the first round where tech-centered artists will be able to apply as tech-centered artists. They won't have to be mashed up under media or, the question mark around visual arts. But the key is having panelists. So having tech-centered artists on the panel, even if you are funding it under, music or media or visual arts or theater, is really the key, because you need that expertise and that familiarity and that kind of understanding of the work and what the work is trying to do in order to, have success on a panel level. That was a really key thing for us.
Thank you for that, Eleanor. Yeah, we do have a question in the chat, Jax. So once you're done, I'll ask one of our attendees question.
Okay, a really quick thing, LaJuné, you mentioned collaboration and teams, and that was another thing that came up a lot in the report. Is sometimes there are so many different nodes of work, and I think once you kind of start and you find a thread to start pulling from, you'll find and tap into those type of artists. But I do think that does require a little bit of part on the part of a funder, or at least in my case too, at the Arts Endowment and building our portfolio. It was a lot of outreach and a lot of digging and a lot of talking to artists and going in the spaces where they're going to really start cultivating that type of art. And jazz is something that I feel like with free jazz in particular, some of these artists are really playing on some of those improvisational principles.
Great. Thank you, Jax. So we have a question from our attendees. I'll read both the first part and second part. And Nicole, if you want to come off mute and correct me, feel free to do that. So Nicole mentions, I was curious whether or not, I was curious not to see or hear any mention of blockchain. By blockchain, Nicole means NFTs. How does the panel see this intersecting with art and tech, if at all? So anyone can jump in if you've got a response for that one.
It's certainly included in this breadth. If it's not like called out singularly, it's definitely something I think is an undercurrent of discourse. And I think LaJuné would probably be the best person. Do you want to talk a little bit about how artists are thinking around that and the work that you're seeing?
It's been really interesting. Mainly, I would say because I guess like there are just like so many people who are, I guess, like interested in the blockchain. So I think that definitely, and with NFTs, luckily for me, like I have participated in like a Sotheby's auction. So like that was really interesting. And also it's sort of like, I guess like introduced a new avenue for me to sort of sell work. And to also, I guess, like widen the audience of people who have access to my work. Which is really cool. But I think right now, sort of where, like how I'm viewing NFTs is mainly from like a research perspective, mainly because, I mean, like, even though I am selling NFTs, sort of like as part of my practice, it is very much from like the sort of, okay, what does this mean for my practice? What does this mean for like, what it means to sell work? Also because I feel like so much of my work, has not been sold in this way. So to, I guess, like go into another avenue as, I guess, like sort of like diving into this world now of like contemporary art in the sort of contemporary art world within like galleries, just viewing my work within a different context has been interesting.
Thanks, LaJuné. I want to go back to something you mentioned, Eleanor. You said that it's really important to have tech-centered artists on your evaluation panel. And just to kind of take a different turn and to talk a little bit about evaluation, any of you can respond to this question. So what are some of the common mistakes? It's kind of two-part. So what are some of the common mistakes that might occur when a grant reviewer evaluates art and technology projects? Or for you, LaJuné, what are some of the things that you think reviewers could pay a little bit more attention to that could be easily missed? So anyone can dive in with your response.
I can tell you a worst case scenario for why why you want experience on the panel. A Minnesota-based multimodal technology-centered artist was having their work reviewed. And the panel, this wasn't at Jerome, this is a separate organization, but they were having their work reviewed. This was, I think, about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was a public panel. So they got to listen in but not respond. As a panelist was like, I don't understand what they're doing with these nets. Like, is this like a fishing net? Is it going to be hanging up, or what's the whole thing? Because it was being reviewed by a visual arts panel. And they were talking, this artist was talking about net art, not art made of nets, which, if there had been someone on the panel familiar with net art, that could have been a different kind of conversation. So that is if you don't understand, like I don't really understand directly the implications of what's needed for, working with artificial intelligence or, doing an augmented reality project. But artists who are working with this technology will know. They will know what it takes. They will know where the artist is in terms of their engagement with the technology. I won't know that. So I think that, just like with any field, with any panel, you want to have people on the panel who understand the applicants. And whether that's art and technology or visual arts or dance, or, you want to have the breadth and depth there. And so I think that's what I'm talking about.
That's great. Thanks, Eleanor. And Suzanne Callahan in the chat, she mentioned, having the literacy to talk about the art and to speak art and technology ease, right? Like that lingo. And so kind of like, well, where do you get that literacy, or where do you get that, whether it's talking about it or, or evaluating it, like you said, having someone on the panel is really important. And if there is a glossary that you have or use, I would love to hear about that now from anybody.
Actually, in the Tech as Art report, we do have a glossary because we realize how important that is. And that kind of also provides some basic classifications and language that you could do to understand the different types of VR projects or AR. What does mixed reality mean? And what types of projects might exist in that space? So honestly, if you open up that report, there's so much in there in terms of honing the language that artists are using, because it's built from the conversations of over 100 artists as well. Building on what Eleanor was saying, going back to the work sample question in terms of evaluation, if you have the right type of panelists on there as well, they'll understand the different types of approaches. And because I think sometimes, because these projects can be a rarity when they're in a grant pool, some people have a tendency to go, yay, it has technology, it seems so impressive, let's support that. And then might not actually, maybe that project wasn't the best example of a project in that type of work. I think that was like a vague way of saying it, but I think developing that type of evaluation is something you can learn. And there are sometimes the more vague proposals could be doing really amazing work, but I think artists also struggle with writing grants to talk about their projects. So I would say there's a lot of technical assistance needed just for artists, really to understand how they can speak to funders as well. I think it goes both ways. And I think when artists have to talk about what their final project is or what their project activities are, the way that we might think of a project as, and for us at the Arts Endowment, it's basically anything you can think of. But an artist might think you want a final product that you can like tour around. And so I'll pass that over to LaJuné as just an opener of some of the challenges maybe that you've encountered and things like that. You're shaking your head.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. One thing that I've learned also as an artist sort of working in this field, and I think this was like touched upon, was just the amount of like resources that are needed to make something actually happen. Like when I got my first residency, I thought that I was going to just have that residency and that was going to support like my vision. But then I realized like really quickly that now that I had this residency, I also had to get other residencies and fellowships, and I had to get them all sort of like at the same time to sort of make something happen. And then also, I guess, having that space and time for just the research for the project. So like having a realistic sort of like time scale for like how a project can actually be built over time. Because I think like for me, when I first started with this project, like that first residency for me was just research. And I thought that I was going to actually come out with a product. But I guess I realized like, oh, like this is not necessarily about that. It's about all of these like little parts that I can sort of dive into and question. And also it's about like connecting with other artists and sort of building that community around the work as well. But yeah, the realization around like that everything is not going to be built today and that's going to take time to actually like see your vision through. And I guess like for I guess like funders and like for residency and fellowship folks to like sort of understand that too, especially like with larger scale projects. Yeah.
Thanks, LaJuné. Eleanor, when I threw the question out about evaluation and having a glossary, I think you were going to say something as well. Did you have another resource that you wanted to talk about?
I was just going to reinforce what Jax said, that the NEA report has that built in there.
Okay, perfect. Oh, all right. Okay, so if you could give me sharing access, Steve, our brilliant web and knowledge manager here. I want to share my screen so that you can all see more examples of what work can look like that you're supporting when it comes to supporting arts and technology. So if you can give me that. There we go.
Could you repeat that?
So I'm going to show everyone LaJuné's work so that they can see examples. Hoping they can support. But you know, maybe other people didn't hear what I said either. So I'm glad that you asked that. You can always reinforce. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see this. And I'm going to put this on presentation mode here. And we're going to hope for the best. Are we seeing it? Can someone give me a nod if you are?
It's not.
It's static. It's not moving image, if that's what.
Okay.
Oh, I guess.
Oh. Okay, I'll give this like 15 more seconds. And if it doesn't show up, then you'll get to enjoy it when we send the follow-up, everyone. All right. We tried, LaJuné, but we'll make sure everyone gets
thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, I would like to keep this conversation going. And if you have questions, keep dropping them in the chat. We'll get to them and we'll extend them to our presenters. But I would like to ask you all who just presented, what are some of the challenges that you faced with seeking support for arts and technology related projects or supporting arts and technology? projects. Anyone can start. Eleanor, why don't you go first?
Okay, I'll start. I think, initially it was about starting with the relationship building. Jerome had, when I came into the foundation in 2008, there was a funding relationship with some organizations. But in terms of any relationships with artists, that wasn't there. So that was the first step, was starting to build first a relationship with those organizations, and then also really getting to know the artists that they were supporting, and then beyond that, concentric circles out. And what is happening today is just, from 2008 till today, it's just radically different and transformed. I think that the understanding the time, as LaJuné, as you said, the time it takes and the resources it takes and the ecosystem that it takes is really important, because you're not going to get, a little signed, sealed, delivered package, with a $5,000 grant. But a $5,000 grant could be a component, to help. Like, it would buy one of those things that you talked about. What was it? The seats, the
motion captures.
The motion captures, yeah. So just understanding, like, whatever your level of funding is, what that can support, and being realistic about that, I think, is one of the kind of learning curves for us.
That's great. Thank you, Eleanor. Jax, LaJuné.
LaJuné, do you want to go first?
Got the floor, Jax.
I think getting the language right, that it spoke to the people we were trying to reach. So what we've settled in media arts for grants for arts projects seem to be working. We saw a large increase in our last, in the gap 2 in our last July deadline for arts and technology related projects, and also the types of projects we were looking for. And that was a relief. That took 3 years to start doing the outreach, doing the technical assistance for the networks and the artists and the organizations and the cohorts, and getting people to really understand, as funders, we want to support artists and arts infrastructure. We want your project to get funded, and we genuinely want you to be successful, and we want your career to be successful. We want all the stepping stones to be there. So we want to support all of those stepping stones. So I think through conversations, people can start, or at least for us, prospective grantees or prospective applicants start thinking about what their proposal might look like and how that might fall within what we would call field building. So that for us, we've supported developer sprints for open source code toolkits. But previously, I don't think people in that field would have thought that would have been an eligible project activity if you looked at our guidelines. So I think that there's just some learning there. I didn't realize the first 2 years I was going around and talking to people like, come on in, submit an application. And then there wouldn't be an application. And I would be so sad in a way of like, oh, we had so many conversations, but it didn't happen. But there's just a lot of hesitation and time constraints for filling out applications, deciding what the work samples might be to uplift a project that I think with certain types of art forms, that lineage is really obvious and really easy to show and document. But artists who are working with technology in different ways, it might not be tangible, or you might need a different type of work sample to really translate the importance of that work or the value of that work. Some of the work might look really abstract. An example that I like to bring up is James George, back when he was applying even just for a residency at I-Beam. He had started this thing, it was like the RBG toolkit or something. I don't remember the first name of it, but he was just conducting some investigations in image processing, and then later developed a volumetric software that is affordable to video producers and other people who might be working in VR. And that is Scatter. That's how we know them today, Scatter and the Depth Kit, and they're one of the artist case studies in the report. But 5 years previous, you would not have known, or maybe they would not have even known where that project was headed. So as LaJuné was saying, how do you know how to frame that project that's iterative and also might be just an extension of creative investigations in that R&D? And it's no different than a painter who's working on a body of work and then wants to go to another residency to continue that body of work. So I think just understanding what that body of work looks like is a challenge for funders, because it looks like so many different ways. That's why it took maybe 50 pages in our report to show you different types of examples, but there's no one type of project. LaJuné, does that resonate with you in any way, or can you build on that?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of this. And I also feel like for me, as someone who's like applies for a lot of things, just finding, for me, finding the right grants and opportunities to apply for, like that's something that I'm really just like aware of, mainly because not everything is something that I should apply for. Like I know that there, like a lot of my work like right now doesn't really like focus on like artificial intelligence, but like there are grants that are specifically focused towards that. And so I think like just for like artists to sort of know for themselves, like, okay, like what, like where does my work lie sort of like on this various scale of different technology grant applications and residencies. And so, yeah, and it's been really helpful for me to sort of navigate and sort of just like hone in on what my practice is about and what it means to me. And so, yeah, I think like my relationship to writing for grants and residencies has really helped me sort of get clear on what my practice is about, and also get very like concise too. I try my best because I know that because I do also know that like a lot of people may not know like a lot of the sort of jargon with tech. I try my best to sort of not like focus on those words and maybe like focus on other various different areas. So it's like, yes, like this piece does have all of these various different difficult technical elements to it, but I'm not going to just like talk too much about that. Mm-hmm. I'm going to talk about what it actually is about and why I'm doing it. And I think that focusing from that angle has been really helpful for me because I think it's allowed reviewers to sort of dive a little bit into my process and into my why. So, and I think that that's really important. So yeah, it's been really helpful just in general to sort of just like continue making work. Yeah.
I love that, LaJuné. Eleanor, were you going to say something before I get to the next question?
No, I was looking at that next question and thinking about it.
Well, I'm going to read the question in the chat out loud, especially, we do record these. You will get a recording of this, but, for folks who are watching in the after version and not reading the chat, the next question that came in reads, I'm also really curious about how to best support arts organizations in supporting artists in the development and production of their technologically focused work. So many of our Culture Source member organizations have big dreams for presentation of multimedia interdisciplinary work, but lack the tech infrastructure, sometimes even good, up-to-date laptops to adequately present and produce the work. So what are your recommendations for folks in this scenario? And also we talked about previously, if you're living in a place where like maybe you've got, great laptops, but you don't have adequate internet, right? How would you respond to someone like this? You can all kind of chime in.
I would encourage starting with convening the artists that are working in this in your area. I think Culture Source, that you're Michigan, right? So, Sage Crump, who we mentioned earlier on in the presentation, works with complex movements, and there's a lot of work around art and tech going on through Allied Media. And so taking off my Jerome hat, I used to work for the Walker Art Center as the director of all things production. And when we were building a new theater space to make it accessible for people working in all forms, we convened artists, and every artist said, well, it's different depending on the project that I'm working on with technology, because I might be working with virtual reality for this one. I might be working with something completely different, for another project. So infrastructure is the key, like if I have the bandwidth to get what I need to go, it might be Bell Labs is the only place where I can get the equipment that I need to make this happen. So I would really encourage just starting with the artist and what they're doing as a beginning point for what do people need.
I was just writing about this the other day in our regional roundtable report, and there is this issue with less experienced or less resourced organizations or artists who are trying to do these projects, but they might have these really big ideas and dreams, but they don't really have the expertise to fulfill that. So I kind of think of it like, if I were about to go build a house, I'm not going to go learn everything there is about building a house. It's just too much to learn. So there's a lot to be said about developing those partnerships and developing those relationships and intersecting networks to work with people who might have those resources and expertise to really make that dream come true. And it really, that's saying teamwork makes the dream work is so true, especially in this type of work, because it does take a team. And this was mentioned by so many of the artists in the roundtables, that a lot of times these projects are not a single person endeavor. These are our group projects. And if we are all collectively learning and collectively trying to build an infrastructure together, even if it's just in a city or in a region, there are so many cultural assets that you might already have that they could be working with to make those dreams come true. So finding those good partners and being able to offer the funding, or being that person that can do the matchmaking and weave those networks, and is part of the challenge, I think, right now, because there's been such a long standing silo, I think, between this type of activity, which has been going on for decades, but often kind of a little bit under-resourced, a little bit misunderstood, and often existing on the fringe. But now I think, there's a real time to tap into that expertise and see what everybody's, there are people who have rooted knowledge in this, old generations and new generations alike. LaJuné?
That's right. And right after you're done, LaJuné, we only have 2 more minutes, and I've got 2 more questions for you all. So we'll transition after that.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree also with that. For me as an artist, with that June performance at the Brooklyn Public Library, even though I was working with A Blade of Grass, I also used my Jerome Hill Fellowship funding for like the projections, because I wanted them to be like a specific way. So I'm always like using from various and multiple sources for my work to be seen as I want it to be. Even with this past performance at Abrams Art Center, basically it was a collaboration between them and Pioneer Works. And so I was able to sort of reach out and have a larger reach to also like the students that I work with at Pioneer Works, to have them like sort of integrated into the process. And then also with any of the technical needs that they had, or like the technical sort of resources that they had, I was able to sort of integrate that into the work as well. So I'm always working with like at least 2 organizations or institutions for my projects to be fully realized.
That's great, LaJuné. Thank you. Eleanor, do you have one more very quick comment?
I was just going to say, start with the artists, because they have the relationships, they have those partnerships, and they, that relationship piece is just so key.
You're right. And speaking of relationships and having artists centered, what are the opportunities available to support arts and tech work that you can share about right now?
Can you say that again?
Yeah.
Sorry.
What are the opportunities available to support arts and technology work?
Do you mean for funding?
Yeah.
Current funding? Oh. Well, at the Arts Endowment, we have the Grants for Arts Projects, Media Arts portfolio, which is open to creative technology projects, emerging art forms. New York State Council on the Arts has the Electronic Film and Media program supporting organizations, but then also the Individual Artist program supports electronic media and film artists, which I think that's a great model. And also with NISCA, they're doing re-grants to another organization to provide assistance for media artists to distribute their works, and then also technical assistance, I think, for organizations. So there's kind of like a nice little infrastructure there that I would love to see that at other state arts agencies. Those are 2 off the bat. There's so many, but and there's actually a few pages of that in the report of organizations and the types of support. It's in the back in the appendices. I'll just stop there so Eleanor and LaJuné can talk.
Thanks for that, Jax. Eleanor, LaJuné.
Well, Jerome, directly for individual artists, we have the Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship, which is now accepting applications. And you can apply directly as a tech-centered artist. And we support organizations that are supporting tech-centered artists through our organization program. I also want to just shout out that, Knight Foundation has a specific funding focus on tech-centered art.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right, and we've got a comment from Niska in the chat. If any grant makers want to contact Karen, you can. Her contact is in the chat, so go ahead and grab that before you leave. And LaJuné, do you have any final words before we close out? To leave us with?
Thanks for having me. I had fun today, and I also learned a lot, so this is great. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining us today. I know we're 2 minutes past our time, but we're really glad that you were here. The contact information of the presenters is on your screen, and we will share it and follow up when we share our PDF. I've dropped in the chat a survey, so you can let us know what you thought of the webinar, and also let us know, what more do you want to learn about supporting arts and technology. As I mentioned earlier, this program is the first of many that we will be producing on the topic. So please do take the survey, and please do leave your comments and let us know. We will also be providing a recording of the presentation, so you can stay tuned for that. And lastly, we of course want to keep these conversations going as we reimagine the future of philanthropy. So if you have further questions, you can reach out to me, Sherilyn Seeley, and thank you so much again for joining us. Have a great day, everyone.